In 1841, deep in the swamps of Alabama, the name Silas Rotter carried weight heavier than iron shackles. He was feared not because he was strong, but because he was cruel, a man who believed domination was his birthright. His plantation, Briar Hollow, was a fortress of misery, ruled by punishment, humiliation, and psychological terror. Among the enslaved were two sisters whose bond was stronger than any chain. Leora, the elder, calm and calculating, and Mira, younger, sharper, quick to anger. Silas saw them not as people, but as his next possessions, rare, beautiful, and, most dangerously, spirited. But before he could take what he believed was his, the sisters vanished, and what followed the nights of terror, the screams in the cane fields, the mutilated remains found days later became one of the most disturbing stories whispered across the South. Some said the sisters were guided by the spirits of their ancestors. Others believed the swamp itself rose to protect them. Whatever the truth, one fact remained undeniable. Silas Rotter did not die a man, and what they did to him left even the bravest men unable to speak of it without trembling. This is the tale of the sisters who turned fear into a weapon and made the devil himself beg for mercy. The morning Silas Rotter announced his decision, the sugarcane fields were thick with fog, swallowing the plantation in a pale, ghost-like haze. The enslaved workers moved silently, sensing a shift in the air, a storm not of weather, but of intentions. Leora felt it first. She paused mid-swing with her machete, eyes narrowing as Silas rode toward the fields on horseback, boots gleaming, expression carved with arrogance. Mira stood beside her, hands trembling from exhaustion, but her gaze held fire. "You feel it too," Mira whispered. Leora nodded once. "Something's coming." Silas stopped his horse a few feet away from them. His eyes crawled over the sisters with the slow, assessing chill of a man picking out furniture. "You two," he said, voice smooth as spoiled milk. "Step forward." No one breathed. Even the cane seemed to stand still. Leora stepped first, shielding Mira slightly behind her. Silas smirked at the protective gesture. "I've made a decision," he said. "You girls are done in the fields. From today on, you belong to the house." A ripple of dread spread through those working. No one wanted to be in the house. The house meant control. The house meant isolation. The house meant you were under Silas's eye. Mira's voice was barely a whisper. "We don't want." Silas cut her off with a raised hand. "Slaves don't get wants. You're property. And property goes where I say." He turned his horse slightly, tilting his head as he looked at them the way a butcher examines animals before slaughter. "Clean up," he added. "Tonight, you come to the big room, and you will obey, or you'll be taught to." Then he rode off, satisfied with himself, unaware of the fury brewing behind him. As soon as he was out of earshot, Mira grabbed Leora's wrist. "We can't go into that house. You know what he does. You know." Leora stared toward the mansion, its white pillars gleaming like bone. Her voice came low, steady. "We're not going. But he'll send the overseer," Mira whispered, panic rising. "He'll drag us if he has to." Leora glanced at the woods bordering the fields, dense, dark, whispering ancient secrets. "Then we won't be here to drag." That night, as the sun dipped behind the tree line, painting the sky blood red, the sisters made their choice. They slipped from their cabin in silence, Mira carrying a small cloth bundle of food, Leora gripping a rusted knife she'd hidden for months. Every step toward the swamp felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted letting them leave. Behind them, the plantation was preparing for Silas's evening. Lanterns lit the windows of the big house. Servants rushed to arrange things. Silas himself drank whiskey on the porch, impatient, smug, certain he owned the night and them. But the sisters moved like shadows between the trees. Once they reached the swamps, Mira hesitated. "Where will we go? They'll hunt us." Leora didn't answer. Instead, she knelt, placed her hand against the wet soil, head bowed. Mira had seen her do this before, speak, silently, to something older than words. When Leora finally looked up, her eyes held a fire Mira had never seen. "We won't run forever," Leora said. "We'll hide. We'll wait. And when we come back," her grip tightened around the knife. Silas Rotter will learn what it means to fear. Far behind them, a horn sounded the alarm. The overseers had discovered the empty cabin. The hunt had begun. So had the sisters' revenge. The rain arrived without warning, thick, slashing sheets that drenched the land in minutes. Thunder rolled across the sky like a warning drumbeat, but inside the manor, the storm had already begun long before the clouds burst. Elijah Beaumont sat in his carved mahogany chair, boots propped on the table, swirling a glass of amber whiskey while he waited for his girls to finish cleaning the parlor. His lips curled into a satisfied smirk each time he heard their footsteps. The house, once quiet, had become a twisted stage where he forced them into servitude far beyond labor. Nara scrubbed the corner floorboards until her fingers burned. Across the room, Leela polished the baseboards in trembling silence. Their hair hung wet over their shoulders. Elijah had ordered them to wash themselves before entering the house. To smell less like the fields, he had said. But Nara's eyes were no longer filled with fear. Beneath her lowered lashes burned something sharper, purpose. And Lila, though still shaking, clung to her sister's whispered instructions like a lifeline. "Tonight," Nara had said. "We begin." Elijah took another long drink, watching them with lazy amusement. "You two work slower every day," he drawled. "Maybe I need to start punishing you separately." Lila's hand slipped. The rag fell from her fingers. His eyebrow lifted. "Oh? Did I scare you, little dove?" Before she could answer, Nara spoke, her voice steady. "We aren't scared anymore." Elijah laughed. A deep, confident laugh. "Oh, I like that. Fire. I can break fire." Nara's eyes flicked toward the window. Thunder growled overhead. Rain hammered the glass so hard the panes rattled. Elijah didn't notice the small glances the sisters exchanged, nor the way Nara subtly adjusted her stance. He thought he owned them completely. Nara rose slowly from her knees. "You want us upstairs, don't you?" she asked softly. He grinned. "Now you're learning." Lila followed Nara to the staircase, her legs trembling so violently she could barely walk. Elijah stood and grabbed the whip from its place on the wall, more out of pride than need. "Up," he ordered. Nara climbed without hesitation. Lila paused halfway, looking back at him, but this time with something unfamiliar in her gaze. Not fear. A flicker of understanding. A spark of belief. They entered his private chamber, the room where so many atrocities had occurred that the air itself felt heavy with ghosts. Nara stepped inside first, scanning the room swiftly. Just as she had predicted, the lantern on the bedside table, the heavy drapes, the rug beneath the bed hiding loose floorboards, and the large mirror he used for his amusement. Everything was exactly where she remembered. Elijah sauntered in behind them, closing the door with a casual flick of his wrist. "Now," he said, "who wants the honor of going first tonight?" Nara turned to face him. "You do." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in a blinding white glow. Elijah's grin faded just slightly at the eerie confidence in her voice. "What did you say?" "You heard me," she replied. "You go first." Lila stepped closer to Nara, slipping her hand into her sister's. They stood together, shoulders squared, breath steady. Elijah's amusement collapsed into annoyance. "What game are you playing?" he demanded. "No game," Nara said. "Just a choice." Thunder cracked loud enough to shake dust from the rafters. "What choice?" he barked. Nara lifted her chin. "You leave us alone, or you face what's coming to you." Elijah stared for a long moment, then burst into laughter so sudden and wild it echoed off the walls. "You too?" he roared. "You think you can threaten me?" He stepped closer, whip in hand. Nara didn't flinch. "We aren't threatening, we're warning." Elijah raised the whip, and that's when the window behind him exploded inward. Shattered glass sprayed across the room as icy rain and wind tore through the curtains. Elijah spun around, startled, shouting something incoherent, but in that distraction, Nara moved. She lunged for the lantern. Lila dove for the drapes. The flames caught instantly, the oil in the lantern flickered, then roared as Nara tossed it into the heavy fabric. Fire crawled upward like a living creature, growing with terrifying speed. Elijah stumbled backward, eyes wide. "What are you doing?" he shrieked. "Put it out!" But the fire was the least of his problems. Lila stepped in front of him, trembling no more. "You don't own us," she whispered. Then Nara pulled the floorboard loose. Elijah froze the moment he saw what was beneath it because he remembered the last man who had tried to run from the plantation. He remembered the traps he himself had installed. He had forgotten one still existed. Nara didn't forget. The metal teeth snapped shut around Elijah's ankle with a crunch that drowned out even the storm outside. His scream tore through the house. He fell backward, the whip flying from his hand. The sisters stood over him. Rain blew into the room. Fire climbed the wall. The trap's jagged teeth dug deeper into his flesh with every movement. Elijah clawed at the metal, blood pooling beneath him. "You did this," he gasped. "You planned this." Nara's expression never wavered. "You taught us how to survive." Lila knelt beside her sister. "You taught us how to hurt you back." Elijah's screams rose again, but no one came. No one ever came for the cries of slaves. Tonight, for the first time, a master learned what that felt like. The storm swallowed his voice. The fire lit the room with hungry orange light, and the sisters stood united finally, fearlessly over the man who believed he could own their bodies, their minds, their lives. He had taken everything from them. Now, they were going to take everything from him. After the sisters' first attempt at rebellion, the threat in Silas Brantley hardened into something uglier, something that hid behind a smile sharp enough to cut glass. For 3 days he barely spoke. He did not shout. He did not whip. He did not even ask for them. Silence, his most dangerous mood. Etta felt it in her bones, heavy as humidity before a storm. Mira felt it in her sleep, waking at night choking on the weight of dread. Even the other slaves noticed. When the master was quiet, the dogs stopped barking. When he paced, the walls themselves seemed to lean away from him. On the 4th night, he sent for them. Not one at a time, both. The overseer appeared at the quarters door, lantern raised, breath fogging the cold night air. "Brantley House wants the twins," he said, voice rough. "Now." Etta steadied Mira, whose trembling hands gave her away. "It gon' be all right," Etta murmured, though she didn't believe a word of it. The big house glowed unnaturally bright. Too many lamps, too much light, like he wanted the whole world to watch what came next. Silas Brantley stood in his parlor in a white silk shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hair was combed too neat. His eyes were too calm. On the table beside him lay a branding iron, its metal end shaped into his initials, SB. He wasn't heating it, not yet. It rested cool, but the threat of it burned anyway. "Come in," he said softly. Softness on him was wrong, like honey poured over a blade. The sisters stepped forward, refusing to hide behind one another, though Mira's knees shook. Silas studied them, as if deciding which part he would break first. "You think yourselves special?" he asked. "You think I don't know you whisper rebellion, that you plan things? You think I don't notice when the fire in a slave's eye changes direction?" He walked toward Mira. She froze. Silas lifted a strand of her hair between 2 fingers. "Pretty," he said. "Almost too pretty." Etta stepped forward. "Master, please." He slapped her so fast she didn't see the hand move. Mira cried out, grabbing Etta as she stumbled. Silas smiled now. "That's what I thought. You two forget yourselves. But don't worry, I will remind you who you belong to." He picked up the branding iron. Mira screamed. Etta lunged. He didn't heat it, not yet. Instead, he used the cold iron like a weapon, pressing the unheated metal to Etta's shoulder so hard she gasped. "This is where it will go when I'm done with you," he whispered. He dragged the iron down her arm, not burning her, marking her all the same. Then he turned to Mira. She backed away. "No, please. You'll get the real one," he said. "Right here." He touched the metal tip to her collarbone. Even cold, it hurt. Something inside Mira tore open. Etta saw it, the flicker, the fracture, the new thing born behind her sister's eyes. It wasn't fear. Not anymore. Silas lowered the iron and motioned with 2 fingers. "Strip." "No," Mira said. Etta froze. Silas blinked. "What?" Mira's voice shook, but she repeated it. Louder. "No." Silas's smile faded as if someone snuffed out the light behind it. "What did you say to me?" "I said no," Mira breathed, trembling from head to toe. "I won't." The room shifted. The air recoiled. Silas struck her so violently she crashed into the table, knocking over the lamp. Flame licked across the floorboards. He didn't care. He kicked the lamp aside and grabbed Mira by the throat. "You forget your place," he hissed. "Let me teach it back to you slow." He shoved her to the floor. Etta's vision went red. She launched herself at him, clawing at his face, dragging her nails across his eyes. He roared, staggering back, grabbing her by the hair and slamming her against the wall. Mira scrambled to her feet, coughing, eyes wild. The fire on the floor spread. Silas didn't notice. He raised the iron again. This time he moved toward the fireplace. This time he meant to heat it. "Etta!" Mira shrieked. Etta, dizzy and bleeding, crawled toward her sister. They clung to each other as Silas pushed the iron deep into the flames, the metal tip glowing red, humming with heat. "There," he said, voice steady again. "Now we do it properly." He turned, glowing iron in hand, fire reflecting off his twisted smile. "Which one of you wants my mark first?" But the sisters were no longer pressed against the floor. They were standing, side by side, silent, staring at him with the same expression. A promise. Silas hesitated. "What are you looking at?" He took one step toward them with the red-hot iron, and the sisters took one step backward, not in fear. In calculation. Silas misread it. He always misread them. They glanced at each other. A single nod. Etta whispered, "Now," and Mira whispered, "Yes." The candles flickered. The fire crackled. 3 breaths filled the room. The sisters moved first. Silas didn't understand then. Not truly, but later he would. Later, every man in the county would. Later, the tale of what happened that night would spread like lantern sparks catching wind. The night the sisters began their revenge. The plantation slept under a veil of thick, humid darkness, but the sisters did not. Lila and Mercy remained awake in the slave quarters, sitting close together on the narrow cot they shared, their faces lit by the trembling glow of a tallow candle. No words passed between them. They didn't need conversation to understand each other. What lived between them now was not fear. It was decision. Tonight, they would begin. Not revenge, not justice, no warning. A message, carved into flesh and memory, to let the master know that the same 2 girls he expected to kneel could stand taller than he ever imagined. But first, they had to confirm something. Earlier that afternoon, they'd overheard Thomas Beaumont's overseer, Cray Holler, bragging near the smokehouse, telling the field hands how the master had loaned the sisters to another planter for the next week. Money had traded hands. Plans were already in motion. Lila heard it first. Mercy's breath caught second, and something ancient and cold settled third right behind their ribs. The sisters would not survive being loaned out. That meant they needed a weapon. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the cloth bundle she'd hidden under the cot. Mercy leaned in, her eyes narrowing at the object inside. A broken plantation shears blade, jagged, rusted, and sharp enough to split skin with a whisper. Lila had scavenged it 2 nights ago from the edge of the cane rows where tools were discarded. Carefully, she lifted it. "You sure?" Mercy whispered. Lila didn't blink. "We don't get another chance." Mercy looked at her sister, the girl she had shared a womb with, a cot with, a suffering with, and nodded once. The kind of nod that meant, "It is us or him." Outside, a distant whippoorwill sang. Then another. Then a third. Mercy froze. "That's not right." Lila's head tilted. 3 birds, one after the other. The call repeated with unnatural rhythm. "That's a signal," she murmured. The girls blew out the candle immediately. They slipped to the window, pressing their faces against the gaps in the crooked boards. The moon cast a silver haze across the yard. The big house was dark. The overseer's shack was quiet. The dogs lay curled under the smokehouse roof. Everything looked normal until a figure detached itself from the tree line. A man. No, too small. A boy, barefoot, carrying a sack. He approached their quarters with careful steps, glancing over his shoulder constantly. When he reached the door, he didn't knock. Instead, he tapped twice slow, once fast. Lila opened it a slit, blade hidden behind her thigh. A familiar voice whispered, "Let me in. Quick." It was Jonas, the 1 2-year-old water boy. the one who ran errands during harvest season but was mostly ignored by everyone on the plantation. He slipped inside, eyes wide, chest heaving. "You can't stay," Mercy hissed. "If they see, I seen something," Jonas whispered urgently. "Y'all need to hear it." The sisters exchanged a tense look. Jonas untied his sack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Clean paper, expensive paper, the kind only the master or his associates used. Lila felt her stomach roll. "Where'd you get that?" Mercy demanded. Jonas wetted his cracked lips. "Master Beaumont's office. I was bringing him supper. He ain't inside, so I set the tray down. That's when I saw this on his desk." He handed it to Lila. Her fingers felt numb as she unfolded it. A letter from the neighboring plantation, signed by Silas Drew, a man infamous for his cruelty. She read the words aloud in a strained whisper. "Payment received. Send the girls on Friday. You guaranteed they are untouched. I expect what I paid for." Mercy closed her eyes, pain twisting her features. The master wasn't just loaning them. He was selling them to a man worse than himself. The room became hollow. A pit. A collapsing lung. Jonas wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I thought, you should know. I seen what happened to girls Silas buys." Lila folded the letter slowly, precisely, like she might break it if she moved too fast. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was calm, too calm. Mercy placed her hand on Jonas's shoulder. "Why help us?" Jonas stared at the floor. "Because Silas bought my sister last year, and she ain't lived 1 month." Silence wrapped around the three of them like a burial shroud. Then Lila spoke soft, steady, deadly. "Jonas, tomorrow night. Don't come near the big house." He swallowed. "Why?" Mercy answered for her sister. Because she had the same fire in her chest. Because she already knew the plan. Because by tomorrow night, the master won't be in any condition to sell nobody. Jonas's eyes widened. He nodded once, solemnly, then slipped out the door and ran into the dark. The sisters sat together again, not touching, not speaking. One blade between them, one letter on the floor, one night left before they were sold. Lila finally breathed out. Mercy inhaled, and the decision they made next would ignite the beginning of the master's slow, unforgettable ruin. The plantation house had never been quiet. Its timber bones always creaked, its chimneys always moaned, but that night, the silence was so total it felt unnatural. Even the cicadas outside seemed to hush, as though something sacred or something terrible was preparing to breathe. Adira and Leora stood at the edge of the corridor, their shadows stretching long and thin under the lantern glow. They had moved through this house hundreds of times before carrying trays, changing linens, pretending to be small so no one noticed the fire simmering behind their ribs. But tonight they did not move like servants. Tonight they moved like shadows with purpose. Upstairs, Master Harlan paced across the floorboards of his study. They could hear him. Even through the walls, his footsteps sounded jittery, uneven. Each step fell like an accusation he didn't want to hear. He had sent for no one. He had dismissed the overseer. He had locked the doors himself. But fear has a sound, and the sisters could smell it. Adira glanced at Leora, the older by 2 years but quiet as a midnight tide. Her calm, unnerved people. It used to unnerve Harlan too, before he convinced himself he had broken it out of her. But tonight her calm had shape, a sharp, precise shape that cut through the hallway air. "You remember what we practiced?" Adira whispered. Leora nodded once. "Every step." Adira exhaled. "Then we end it." They moved, not fast, not slow, just steady like inevitability had grown legs and learned to walk. They reached the door to Harlan's study. Light spilled from the gap at the bottom. His pacing stopped. A chair creaked. Papers rustled. Then, "Who's there?" He tried to sound authoritative, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. Leora pushed the door open. Harlan turned, expecting a servant girl with downcast eyes. What he saw instead made him step back so sharply his leg struck the corner of his desk. The sisters entered without bowing, without speaking. Their faces were unreadable. Their posture was straight. Their eyes held nothing but cold, patient memory. Harlan swallowed. "You aren't supposed to be in here." No response. "Do you hear me?" He snapped, louder now, as though volume could restore the power bleeding out of him. You don't come into this room unless I call for you." Still, they said nothing. Leora finally closed the door behind them. The click sounded like a verdict. Harlan's gaze darted to his desk drawer where the pistol lay hidden. Leora saw the twitch in his eyes and stepped sideways, blocking his path without seeming to move at all. Adira took another step forward. Her voice was quiet when she spoke, but the kind of quiet that could split stone. "You took everything from us," she said. Harlan forced a laugh. "You're upset about the past? You think you can walk into my study and speak to me like—" He fell silent, because Adira had placed something on the table between them. A ring. Not any ring. His father's ring, the one the old master had sworn he'd never remove, the one Harlan had searched for after the night he'd mysteriously died. Harlan staggered backward. "Where did you— You couldn't have. We're not here to talk about your father," Leora said softly. "We're here to talk about you." Harlan's bravado crumbled. He backed into his chair and gripped its arms, knuckles whitening. "You think no one remembers," Adira said. "You think no one sees. You think," Leora added, "that because you hold a whip, you hold the truth." Harlan opened his mouth, but no sound came. "Tonight," Adira said, "you learn the cost of what you've done. Based a friend." The lantern flickered. The shadows stretched. The walls seemed to lean in. For the first time in his life, Harlan realized the sisters were not trapped in his world. He was trapped in theirs. He reached for the drawer. Leora was faster. The pistol clattered to the floor before Harlan could touch it. He lunged for it, but Adira kicked it across the room. It slid under the bookshelf. "You can't," Harlan gasped, but his voice died again when he saw what Leora held now. His ledger. The one with the names. The one he thought no one had ever opened. The one that hid the darkest things done on this land. How did you get that?" he sputtered. "It doesn't matter how," Adira said. "What matters is that someone else will see it." Harlan froze. Someone else. Meaning someone who mattered. Someone who could ruin him. Someone who could turn his world to dust. "You wouldn't," he whispered. Leora's gaze did not blink. "We already have." Harlan's breath hitched. Adira leaned close enough that he could see the reflection of his shaking hands in her eyes. "Tonight isn't about revenge," she said. He blinked, confused. "It's about ending your story," Leora finished. The lantern flame flared violently, then steadied. Harlan realized too late that the house had never been silent. It had been holding its breath, waiting for this. And when the sisters stepped forward together, he understood something that chilled him deeper than any blade. They had never been afraid of him. He had always been afraid of them. The sun dipped behind the cane fields, leaving the plantation bathed in a bruised, purplish twilight. A soft wind swept over the yard, stirring dust and dead leaves like restless spirits. Tonight was the night. The sisters had said nothing aloud, but every look, every breath shared between them hummed with the same electric truth. They were ready. Silas Beaumont, however, lounged lazily in his parlor with a glass of whiskey, humming some off-key tune as if the world itself bent around his comfort. A man like him believed he owned everything he touched: skin, breath, innocence, futures. He believed the sisters existed only to kneel, to breathe when told, to shiver when commanded. He did not see them watching him from the shadows. Naomi stood near the doorway, her posture stiff, her stare cold enough to sour the air. Her younger sister, Dinah, lingered behind her with silent tension, her hands clenched, her heartbeat loud in her ears. "We do it," Dinah whispered, barely audible. Naomi didn't turn. "We do." The plan had not been spoken aloud until now. Words gave things weight, and weight could crush. But now it was time. The world around them felt still, holding its breath. Even the cicadas went quiet, as if sound itself wanted witness to what was coming. Naomi moved first. She walked toward the parlor with smooth, steady steps. For the first time in years, she didn't shrink. She didn't avert her eyes. She didn't tremble. Silas noticed instantly. "Well, look at you," he said, grinning through whiskey-stained teeth. "You come pray at my feet for bed?" The words were meant to diminish her. They didn't. Not anymore. "No," Naomi said calmly. He blinked, not used to that word from a slave's mouth. "No?" Dinah stepped into view behind her. Silas smirked at the sight. His two favorite girls, as he called them, though what he meant was something uglier, something that rotted the soul. "Well then," he chuckled, standing too fast and sloshing whiskey down his vest. "If it ain't for prayer, then—" Naomi stepped closer. "We come to give you something." Silas's grin widened. "Now that's more like—" She reached into the folds of her dress. Silas leaned forward eagerly. Naomi pulled out the hand-forged iron spike. Silas's smile froze. What in hell's that?" Dinah moved behind him in a flash, gripping his shoulders. Her touch wasn't gentle this time. It was anchored, grounding herself in what she must do. Naomi lifted the spike and placed its cold point just beneath his chin. Silas gasped, finally understanding, and for once in his wretched life, he was speechless. "No screams," Naomi whispered. "Not tonight." He tried anyway. Dinah covered his mouth. The iron spike slid in, slow, deliberate, merciless. His eyes bulged, his knees buckled. Blood ran down his neck in a hot, steady flow. Naomi didn't look away. When it was done, Silas collapsed in a heap, once a tyrant, now just flesh cooling on a wooden floor. Dinah released a sob not of grief, but of release, of something uncoiled after years of being caged. Naomi held her sister's face between her hands. "It's over," she whispered, but she knew it wasn't. Not yet. The plantation was a monster with many heads. Silas was only one. Men like him would descend family, business partners, slave catchers thirsty for blood. Killing Silas was not simply vengeance. It was war, and war required more than a spike in the dark. Naomi stood tall and looked out the parlor window. The stars above seemed to watch with somber approval. "We leave tonight," she said. "Before the blood dries." Dinah nodded through trembling breaths. But fate was never kind to women like them. Before they could take their first step toward freedom, the sound of heavy boots echoed outside. Torches flickered through the trees. Voices carried over the yard, rough, sharp, commanding. Silas had expected visitors. They had arrived early. Naomi grabbed Dinah's hand. "Stay behind me." The door handle rattled. A voice shouted, "Silas, you alive in there?" Naomi tightened her grip on the spike. Dinah clutched a fire poker, knuckles white. The door swung open, and the sisters, two former victims, two rising storms, faced their next enemy. Standing in the doorway with suspicion in his eyes, and the scent of danger rolling off his clothes. Tonight had been meant for escape. Instead, it would become a battlefield. The house was too quiet. Not the silence of sleep, nor the hush of a late southern evening. This was a held breath, a silence that waited, a silence that listened, a silence that hung over the plantation like a noose, ready to tighten. Master Grayson felt it immediately when he stepped onto the veranda with a lantern in his hand. The flame shook, but not from wind. The air was still as stone. Even the cicadas, creatures too foolish to know fear, had gone mute. He wiped sweat from his temple. He told himself it was only the summer heat. He knew it was not. Inside the house, every candle had been lit. They glowed behind curtains like vigil lanterns at a church funeral. The staff, what was left of them, had vanished. Doors stood halfway open, rocking slightly on their hinges as if someone had walked through them only moments before. He swallowed. "Lydia! Ruth!" His voice cracked, and the crack echoed down the hallway like splintering wood. No response. He moved through the house with the lantern held high. Its light touched corners, shadows, memories. The rug where he had dragged Ruth, screaming, for her inspection. The staircase where Lydia had once almost fallen from exhaustion carrying linens. The master bedroom door where 3 nights ago he thought he heard female laughter that wasn't human. Grayson clenched his jaw. He had survived wars, fought duels, outdrank professional gamblers, outlived disease, drought, and the devil's own luck. But nothing unnerved him like the thought that 2 slave girls he had owned, commanded, broken, were now the ones hunting him. He reached the dining hall. The table was set. For one, his breath froze. A plate, a fork, a glass of whiskey, and a folded napkin, neat as a church prayer. With shaking hands, he opened it, scrawled in charcoal, in a hand not quite steady but bold enough to carry meaning. "Sit!" He jerked upright. His lantern rattled. He spun toward the doorway. Nothing, but the candles flickered as if someone had brushed past them. "No," he whispered. "Not tonight." Not like this. He backed away from the table, heartbeat thundering. He didn't reach the hall, because Lydia stepped into the doorway. Not the trembling girl he once pulled by the hair. Not the crying child who apologized when he struck her. No, this Lydia stood tall, eyes bright, with a fire that came from somewhere far deeper than hatred. She held no weapon. She didn't need one. Behind her, Ruth stepped into the light. Her face was calm, unreadable, almost serene. But her hands were wrapped in something white. Grayson knew what it was, the same rope he had used on them. He backed up. "You don't know what you're doing." Lydia's voice was soft enough to be terrifying. "We know exactly what we're doing." His back hit the wall. Ruth walked forward slowly. Her bare feet made no sound on the hardwood. The rope dragged behind her in a long, whispering line, like a snake tasting the floor. Grayson tried to stand tall. "Why, you think you can hurt me? You think anyone will believe?" Lydia cut him off with a single sentence that turned his blood to river ice. "Master Grayson," she said quietly, "nobody believes screams out here. Not yours, not ours, not ever." The lantern slipped from his hand. Glass shattered. Flame jumped. The floor sparked. But neither girl flinched. Ruth lifted the rope. Grayson lunged for the staircase. Lydia was faster. She slammed the door beside him, shut with her palm, inches from his face. The sound cracked through the hall like a gunshot. "You made a mistake," she whispered. "You taught us how to corner something weaker than you." He swung at her wildly. She ducked. His fist hit the wall. Ruth looped the rope around his arm before he could pull back. In one motion, she wrapped, pulled, tightened just like he had taught her when binding bales of cotton. Pain shot up his shoulder. He screamed. The scream echoed, and was answered. The sound came from upstairs, from outside, from the walls. A low rhythm, a steady one. Thump, 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 like fists, or feet, or a heartbeat under the floorboards. Grayson froze. What is that?" Lydia stepped close enough that her breath touched his cheek. "Everyone who helped you," she whispered. "Everyone who watched. Everyone who stayed silent." She leaned in. "They're not staying silent anymore." The rhythm grew louder. Grayson's knees buckled. He was not a religious man, but he prayed. He prayed because he finally understood. This house was no longer his. It belonged to them. And tonight was only the beginning. The wind moved strangely over the ruins of the old plantation. The main house was a blackened skeleton now, half swallowed by vines, its broken windows staring like dead eyes toward the cane fields. Nothing had lived there for years. Nothing dared. Yet locals swore the land breathed. Some said you could still hear the screams of Master Halston on quiet nights, carried by the wind like an echo trapped in time. Others claimed they'd seen two women barefoot, young, and identical walking hand in hand along the property line before vanishing into the tree line as if swallowed by the shadows. Nobody stayed long enough to look twice. After the sisters' vengeance, the plantation collapsed from the inside out. Halston's family fled in disgrace, his wife refusing to even claim his body, what little of it could be identified. The other overseers who had participated in the assaults left in terror, abandoning their posts without collecting their wages. But the slaves stayed. They held the land for 3 whole weeks, long enough for word to spread across counties, long enough for freedom to taste real. When authorities finally arrived, expecting a war, they found the fields empty. Except for one thing, 2 graves, side by side, marked with nothing but simple wooden boards. Mary and Lila. The officials assumed the sisters had died perhaps from illness, perhaps from owners of nearby plantations reclaiming them violently. Whatever story brought comfort, they accepted. But the graves were empty. The slaves who lived through that night, those who had seen what the sisters became, what they unleashed, never corrected a single rumor. They knew better. They knew Mary and Lila did not die. They shed the last weight of their captivity and melted into the forests, into the swamps, into the world that had tried to break them. There were whispers years later, then decades of 2 women who moved silently from plantation to plantation, freeing girls in the dark, avenging the ones they couldn't save. Of 2 figures who appeared only when a child cried out alone in a locked cabin. Some claimed they brought fire. Others said they brought steel. A few swore they brought something worse. Hope. Real, knowing, sharp-edged hope. a kind that cut deeper than any blade. In the oral histories passed quietly from generation to generation, Mary and Lila became more than sisters, more than victims, more than survivors. They became warnings. White men drank less on the outskirts of the counties where their names were spoken. Overseers locked their doors twice. Drunken planters refused to chase women into the canebrakes, terrified of catching a glimpse of twin silhouettes reflected in torchlight. And slave women, those who carried bruises they never earned, clung to the stories like lifelines. If Mary and Lila could survive it, fight it, reverse it, maybe anyone could. Maybe there was a path carved for them too, a bloody path, a righteous one. By the time the Civil War began, the legend of the Virgin Twins of Halston's Place had spread across 3 southern states. Soldiers claimed they saw 2 women slipping through battle camps, whispering warnings. Runaways swore the sisters led them through the swamp when hunters were close behind. Even children, those born too late to know the real horror, spoke of the twins the way others spoke of guardian spirits. The world never learned the truth, that their revenge was not rage. It was not madness. It was not even justice. It was love, twisted by cruelty, sharpened by trauma, but love all the same, unbreakable, unmatched, and unstoppable. For each other, for every girl who came after, for every voice silenced too early. And though no body was ever found, no death recorded, no final resting place marked, the old plantation lives in only one kind of memory now: fear. Fear of the 2 girls who entered that place as victims, and left as something else entirely. Those who walk the land today swear the soil still grows warm beneath their feet, not from the sun, not from the swamp heat, but from blood that refuses to cool, from names that refuse to fade, from sisters who refuse to be forgotten. Mary and Lila live in every whisper of wind that passes over the ruins. And as long as injustice exists anywhere in the world, they never stopped walking. They never stopped hunting. They never stopped returning. The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the shutters of the great house, but it did nothing to warm the air inside. Jonathan Harcourt lay sprawled on the floor of his own study, the scent of blood and iron thick around him, a bitter reminder of the night's horrors. His hands trembled uncontrollably, reaching for the walls, the desk, anything to anchor himself to reality. But there was no salvation there. Every shadow seemed to twist into the faces of the sisters he had once sought to control, the sisters whose innocence he had stolen, and whose fury now roamed free. Across the plantation, the fields were eerily silent. The usual morning chorus of crows and whistling wind through the cotton stalks was absent. Even the river seemed to move slower, as if the land itself were holding its breath. From the edge of the woods, a faint whistle echoed a melody the sisters had learned from their mother, a song of cunning, of patience, and of vengeance. It was a song no master could ever command. Inside the house, Harcourt's mind raced. He remembered the struggle, the calculated precision with which the sisters had acted. They had struck at the heart of his pride, first his ability to exert control. One sister had drawn him into the study with feigned tears and pleading eyes. The other had slipped behind, silent as a shadow, carrying with her the implements she had prepared in secret. Knives sharpened and hidden in the folds of linen, ropes soaked in the oil of the night before. They had moved like a single creature, their motions synchronized by years of suffering and unspoken agreement. Harcourt remembered the first blow, the flash of steel, the scream that tore from his own throat, and the helpless disbelief in his eyes as he realized he could not overpower them. They were no longer the girls he had toyed with. They were predators, born from oppression, their wrath tempered by the cunning of survival. He had fallen to his knees, expecting mercy, yet finding none. Every cry he uttered seemed to fuel them, sharpen their aim, quicken their strikes. Outside, the plantation workers watched from hidden vantage points, eyes wide with shock and fear. The sisters had done what no one dared to even whisper about. They had struck decisively, and yet their actions bore a strange elegance, a ritualized justice. It was as if the very air conspired with them, carrying each sound and movement to the ears of those who had once been victims themselves. Fear mixed with awe. None dared intervene, and none tried to escape. By the time the sun had fully climbed, Jonathan Harcourt was a shadow of the man he had been. Bloodied, broken, and finally powerless. He could only watch as the sisters stood before him, eyes fierce, lips pressed in quiet satisfaction. One placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, a ghost of gentleness in the midst of ruin. "You thought you owned us," the eldest whispered, her voice steady, cold as steel. "You thought you could take what was never yours." The other sister knelt to examine the ropes and knives that had immobilized him, shaking her head slightly. "And yet, we are the masters of this moment." Harcourt tried to speak, but words failed him. His arrogance, his cruelty, his years of exploitation, they had all led to this final reckoning. And he knew, deep in his soul, that the pain he felt was only a fraction of the torment he had inflicted on them. The sisters left him there, bound and silent, the house echoing with the subtle movements of their departure. Outside, the land seemed to breathe again, as if it had been holding in centuries of anguish and now, finally, could exhale. The river's slow current mirrored the new order of the plantation, a rhythm dictated not by cruelty but by the calculated justice of those who had been wronged. By dusk, Jonathan Harcourt's fate was sealed, not with a shout, but with the quiet knowledge that he would never rise from the ruin he had created. The sisters, though young and once powerless, had rewritten the hierarchy of the land with their courage, their precision, and their indomitable will. They vanished into the woods, leaving behind a plantation forever altered, a man forever broken, and a story that would be whispered for generations. The tale of the virgin slave sisters who took vengeance with the patience and ferocity of the oppressed, and left their master unrecognizable in every sense.